For decades, Japan lived with a contradiction. It had one of the most advanced defense industries in the world, capable of building sophisticated ships, submarines, missiles, and aircraft. But at the same time, it was locked behind some of the toughest export restrictions on military equipment anywhere in the world. That is now changing. Japan has begun dismantling one of the most important limits created in the post-war era, opening the door to a much broader role in the global defense market. And this is not just an economic story. It is a geopolitical shift with consequences for Asia, for U.S. allies, and for the future balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. To understand how significant this is, we need to go back to the end of World War II. After Japan's defeat in 1945, the country was rebuilt under a political and legal framework designed to prevent any return to militarism. The symbol of that framework was Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, a famous clause that renounced war and sharply restricted the role of military power in national policy. Over time, this created a very unusual reality. Japan maintained highly capable self-defense forces, but politically and legally, it preserved a deeply pacifist identity. That same logic also shaped a strict policy on weapons exports. Beginning in the late 1960s and reinforced in the 1970s, Japan adopted rules that effectively blocked the export of military equipment to most, and later almost all, foreign countries. In practical terms, this meant that Japanese defense companies could build excellent equipment, but they had almost no global market. For decades, the domestic military was basically the only customer. That may sound sustainable, but it created long-term problems. A defense industry that sells only at home struggles to scale up production, reduce costs, and compete internationally. It also becomes harder to maintain a strong industrial base if order volumes remain limited. And that is exactly why this new policy matters so much. The change did not happen overnight. Japan has been moving gradually in this direction for years. The old blanket restrictions were softened, then revised, and now the country has taken another major step by allowing a much wider range of military exports under tighter case-by-case review. So why now? The answer starts with the strategic environment around Japan. China's military rise has transformed East Asia. Pressure around Taiwan, maritime tensions in nearby waters, and repeated confrontations around disputed islands have all contributed to a much harsher threat perception in Tokyo. Japan no longer sees the regional environment as relatively stable. It sees it as dangerous, uncertain, and getting worse. Then there is North Korea, with its ballistic missile and nuclear programs. And beyond that, the war in Ukraine has shown how quickly stockpiles of ammunition and military systems can be drained during a major conflict. That has reinforced a lesson now shared by many governments. National defense is not only about troops and strategy, but also about industrial capacity. In other words, if a country cannot produce enough equipment, maintain enough supply chains, and support allies when necessary, its strategic autonomy becomes fragile. This is where Japan's new direction becomes clearer. Tokyo increasingly understands that a strong defense industry is not just a domestic insurance policy. It is also a strategic tool. Exports help sustain production lines, justify investment, improve industrial resilience, and strengthen security ties with partner countries. And Japan has a lot to offer. Despite its pacifist public image, Japan's defense sector is highly sophisticated. One of the most prominent examples is the Mogami-class frigate, a modern multi-mission warship designed with stealth features, strong automation, and a relatively small crew. It represents the kind of naval platform that appeals to countries looking for advanced capability without the burden of massive operating costs. Submarines are another area of strength. Japan has built an international reputation for high-quality conventional submarine design, especially with strong emphasis on stealth, reliability, and maritime performance in difficult regional conditions. Missile technology also matters. Japan has invested heavily in anti-ship systems and coastal defense concepts, reflecting its own geographic realities. In a region defined by sea lanes, island chains, and maritime choke points, that kind of capability is highly relevant to many partners. Beyond that, Japan also has important experience in patrol aircraft, transport aircraft, armored vehicles, and defense electronics. And this is no longer just theory. One of the clearest signs of the new era is Japan's defense cooperation with Australia. The agreement centered on upgraded Mogami-class frigates is more than a contract. It is a strategic signal. It shows that Japan is no longer merely discussing defense exports in the abstract. It is entering the market in a serious way and doing so with trusted partners. But there are still limits. Japan is not turning into an unrestricted global arms seller overnight. Even under the new framework, exports remain subject to political review and oversight. Sales are not simply automatic, and Japan still presents itself as acting with caution. That matters because the policy remains controversial. Inside Japan, critics argue that these changes erode the spirit of the post-war settlement and weaken the pacifist principles associated with Article 9. To them, this is not just a bureaucratic update. It is a symbolic break with the identity Japan built after 1945. Outside Japan, reactions are also divided. China has strongly criticized the move, framing it as a dangerous sign of remilitarization. But other countries, especially those concerned about regional security and supply chain reliability, see Japan's industrial role as a welcome development. For them, a more active Japanese defense sector means more options, more resilience, and less dependence on an increasingly uncertain global environment. That is why this story is bigger than weapons sales. Japan is redefining what kind of power it wants to be. For decades, its role was shaped by restraint, legal caution, and a domestic-only approach to defense manufacturing. Now, without abandoning all of those constraints, it is clearly moving toward a more outward-looking model in which industrial strength, alliance politics, and security strategy are becoming more closely linked. The post-war taboo is not disappearing in one dramatic moment, but it is being dismantled piece by piece. And if this trajectory continues, Japan may become one of the most important defense suppliers in the Indo-Pacific over the next decade. What we are witnessing is the quiet end of one era and the beginning of another. Japan is no longer just protecting itself. It is preparing to shape the regional defense market around it. If you enjoyed this analysis, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next report.